Okay, Jai Baba, everybody. So this afternoon, we're going to actually start in on these 34 talks. The book, Creation and Its Causes, is it's in italics. That's the book title. But we've given that name in quotation marks to this section of the book. These talks to the Mir Ashram boys, as I say, between December 2nd, 1927 and January 14th, 1928. 34 talks that are in this manuscript that I gave you a little showing of, a little bits of it before. I want to this is in the historical section of the book. I shifted to this because it's easier to expand, where I hope you can see a little better.
That's great.
Yeah, so you can see the Meher Institute. This is like a published document giving some of the conditions and rules. On the right-hand side is a book on Baba's work with the Mir Ashram, published by K.J. Dastur, one of Baba's disciples. And these are, just various other documents from Trust Archives that are of interest. Like, who is this? Syed Raza. This is, okay, on the top there, it's Ali Shariarji Irani. Any guess who that is?
Ali.
Baba's brother. And you see the signature down there? That's Shireen. Shireen signed it, isn't it? So they had to sign this document before the kids would be accepted into the school. These are various other things like that, of a lot of interest. Here's like a listing of some of the students. There's some of the stars are in this list.
That's amazing those were kept.
Yeah, I know. Isn't it something? All these years.
Did you get these from the archives?
Trust Archives, yeah. This is an exam. Let's see if I can manage to read. Oh, I have a book where I can read it. I wondered, how did that ever happen?
Baba likes you. He delivered.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you already threw the book on the floor?
Well, I guess Baba likes me in L.A. Elsewhere, he says.
He said you did your job right.
Yeah, this is actually an examination. So I'm going to read a little bit to give you, this is for, terminal examination, 3rd standard. That's like 3rd grade, right? Translate into Marathi. Why do you take the trouble to build this house in which you cannot live? I mean, that's a difficult sentence, wouldn't you say? Soon after this, the quarrel, sorry, I can't read it quite even, was ended. And the war that had lasted so long was ended. At peace together, bird and beast, all met to enjoy a splendid feast. Now they're asking 3rd standard.
A request to read that first sentence. A request to read the first sentence again.
In that quatrain or the earlier one?
Yeah, that one, the question.
Okay, why do you take the trouble to build this house in which you cannot live? But I mean, this is asking 3rd standard kids from Erngaon to translate this into Marathi.
With a lot of condition. It's conditional tenses, right?
It is.
Oh my gosh.
It's sort of unbelievable. But I'm doing this to illustrate that they meant it. I mean, they really meant to give these kids an education. It wasn't a joke. You know, there's so much rhetoric nowadays. The highest quality this, huh? Well, Baba was for real.
Yeah.
You know?
That's right.
That's what a lot of this stuff kind of shows. Let's see.
We should let our kids know how much Mir Baba worked toward their education back in those years, so now they benefit from it.
So here, these are some rules. They're maybe you can implement him here at Maribode, since you're a bunch of kids here. Okay, 1, hands and faces should always be washed and cleaned with the handkerchief provided for this purpose, and not with the shirt or with any other clothes on the body. You don't get it, you're talking with kids, right?
Okay, well, where's my handkerchief? No.
Yeah, I know Lois didn't provide a handkerchief for the purpose, so I just used my shirt.
That's what ties were for before.
Or caps should daily be cleaned with a brush. Care should be taken that they do not get dirty, and when so found, they may be immediately cleaned. I mean, it gives you an idea, you know, that they're really, these kids were really being attended to, you know. Sort of sloppy, careless behavior didn't happen. Because unlike most rules nowadays, these would actually, you know, if Raseb saw you and, said, hey, Cassandra, you haven't, cleaned your cap, he would say so. He would say so. So anyway, these are some of these documents. There's also, this is a write-up that they sent around about the Meher Ashram to different places. They wrote to the New York Times, it gives you an idea that they were getting in touch with these serious publications all over the place.
So that looked like that was a response from the New York Times, right?
Yeah, they didn't get much of a response from them at that. Although when Baba came 2 years later, there were articles about him in the New York Times. There wasn't at this earlier period.
That looks like they're stationary, right?
Yeah. Or no, I'm not sure it is. Yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah,
it is
so
a reply.
maybe someone said, okay, thanks, or something.
Yeah, I think it was kind of a nominal response. They didn't run anywhere with that. But as I say, 2 years later, they really wrote articles about Baba when he visited. So it's interesting. I mean, the idea is to convey that they really took every aspect of this seriously. It wasn't just rhetoric at all. Rhetoric with Baba did not make the grade. Okay, and so I'm just going to show you now some of the pictures, okay, just to get an idea of what the colorful visual imagery of the book is like. I'll go to the start. Here we go. I'll just scroll through some of these. These were done by Nadia, who's going to be talking about this next Friday up at Bay Area at the Talbot's house. And here's one thing about these is that, you know how the editing, I can talk a lot more about how it was done, but there are footnotes and endnotes, and there's stuff in the supplement about what was used and the principles of use. Well, the same questions can be raised about the figures, right? So one of the things we did, we have a key to every figure. And there's there are often many sources, but we picked what we thought would be the best one for the purpose. So when you look at them, you can look at the key and see the source. And also the key gives helpful information about how to read it. So that's another feature of the book. Yeah, here's another one. So you see the original down here? Yeah, it's from Ramju's handwriting. Ramju did that.
Has that ever been done before?
A little louder?
Has that ever been done before, where you explain the figures?
We did it for Tiffin lectures. We started using keys. Actually, Infinite Intelligence in the back of the book has notes on the figures that does all of that also. Yeah. Now here, so you see, the figures were not very developed, but you can see the source figure. So this is about the ocean and waves and bubbles and foam. This is a related one.
Thank you.
This one is about different ranges of planets, part of the astronomy series. These are some of the sources.
I'm sorry, the original had a lot of Persian words on it, I noticed.
The first one did.
Oh, okay.
The others don't, yeah. Yeah, we incorporated that into the final one too.
Okay.
The same vocabulary, yeah. Yeah, there isn't much Persian writing in these. Okay, this is a really significant idea in the book, the clashing of Pran and Akash. Okay. This is a diagram showing the divine theme. Baba wasn't using that phrase at that time, but that's what the idea is. This is Baba's own handwriting. Isn't that cool? This was interleafed among the pages of the manuscript. And it's right on topic. In fact, there's a section of the discourse that recapitulates this idea. And here's another slip in Baba's handwriting. When he did it, we don't know. Baba stopped handwriting 2nd of January this year. My guess would be it's from earlier, before that, but I don't know, maybe Baba broke his rule, who knows. The tables, Nadia did the table. This is again the divine theme pretty well. This is cosmological on the gross and the subtle sphere. This is very interesting, so I won't try to explain it now. So is this. This is Baba's cap, by the way. Baba used his cap to illustrate this idea to the kids. And they drew it down there showing
there's the cap
there. See it? Isn't that neat? Okay. This is about the opposites, the nature of opposites. This is a most unusual diagram. Some of these are up here, by the way. This one is here. Hopefully we'll see what we can get to on these. The diagram was missing for this, although there was a space left for one. So Nadia came up with this to express the straight and the round. Very significant theme.
So did Nadia do the graphics?
Yeah. Yeah,
so
sure.
that figure straight represents?
Huh?
The straight represents what?
We'll have to get to that.
Oh, we will get up, sorry.
But it blew her mind as an artist. She, for several days, was in amazement at the thought. This starts getting into this astronomical series. Maybe we'll have time to talk about that. This is more on that. And this, Baba did this with the kids. He took a lantern and a light and two mirrors and illustrated a principle of reflection that is central to these whole series. And then this is the diagram central to the astronomical bunch. These are 3 worlds that are all shadows of the light globe. And these are 7 suns that arise from this. So your assignment for the LA group is to please write up the definitive interpretation of this.
What?
That'll be for you, Esther. Yeah, bring it in tomorrow morning.
Esther, you can,
Yeah.
you can be the
The 7, is it referring to the 7th plane?
Nope. No. Apparently, I think this is talking literally about planets and suns. It is exceedingly weird, which is why the LA group is perfect for solving. And this is more, these are different ranges of planets. There are references in Chanji's diagram to the octopus diagram, and we think it's probably this.
Cookies.
Yeah, those are actually Anna. That's actually an image of a coin. That's what they actually look like. We got it on the internet. Okay, this is evolution, and we'll say more about that. Baba brought in a puppet, a doll, to show it. Really fascinating. Okay, I'm just skipping over these. It's sort of hard to explain them. This is another astronomical one, but now the moons, there are 7 moons also. He explains that.
So to work on an illustration, I know they're all wildly different. How many days do you think you and Nadia would spend?
We worked 4 days. She would go home and work on them. But we worked together from about 9:30, 10 to 1, 4 days a week for a year and 3 months. So we really spent time on them. You know, you might say, why is that so? Well, it turns out there's a lot to it. It really is. You know.
So how long on one? Let's say even that one.
Well, it's kind of hard to say because, you know, she'd come in with something and we'd look at it and say, well, what do you think about this or what do you think about that? You know, so it's sort of all this back and forth. But she was working seriously on it for more than a year as a big part of her time. And we were working like 3 to 4 hours a day, 4 days a week for a whole year.
Wow.
So we spent a lot of time on this.
Somebody was asking Nadia's last name.
Wolinska. She'll be up at, you can all fly up to the Talbots next weekend.
She
Where she'll be
also
talking.
has a very good paintings of her
Yeah, no,
own.
she's a painter.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I've published 2 of hers.
She lives in India.
Wow, she's amazing.
Do you know Kirk and Marlene up there? Any of you?
Perfect.
Yeah, I know.
Anyway, she's Marlene's daughter.
Oh.
So she's French. She's French.
Yeah, I knew she was French.
Yeah. So, and this shows evolution in the 4 elements, which is a topic explained here. And the last part of the series of talks doesn't have many diagrams, but this one, the actual sources were really minimal. It's just that. But we created this as a roadmap to the 7 asmans here. And all the verbiage is from Baba's talks. And then recognize the foot. You know, Baba, you can tell him from his foot. Isn't it amazing? It couldn't be anybody else's foot.
That's right.
Anyway, this is a most fascinating part of it. I won't try to explain it now. This is an allegory that Baba gave, so we drew an image of it.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's very, and this is the last one in this series. We have this somewhere here. Where did
It's here now.
Oh, right, or over here. And this is very, very significant, actually, the last series of. And then the talks to the Mandali have this diagram and that one. So there's a lot of diagrams.
Yeah.
And they're worth study. One thing I've noticed is a lot of Baba groups will read, say God speaks, and they'll get to the diagram and they skip it. Don't skip the diagrams. They're really a part of Baba's expository technique. They're a big part of it. And even their little details are very often highly significant. Yeah. Okay, well that's a little look at some of the visual. If you just want to buy the book to look at the picture as well.
That's me.
Okay, so now I'll just I appreciate you guys giving at the center 2 days to this. The truth is, in 2 days we can just touch on high points, right, Cassandra? You would know that at this point. Yeah. So that's what I'll be doing. In the very opening, I usually skip this because I don't know why I do, but Baba relates the story of when Baba, and Maharaj, when Baba was at Sakori, this would be 1918, 1919, something like that, tried to count the universes. Some of you may have read this. Yeah. And all the accounts you have read come from here. This is the source of it. And, back in those days, nobody talked about multiple universes. It was idiotic idea, And now it's commonplace. Well, Baba was talking about it then. He talked about it also at the East West Gathering. He said there are innumerable universes. And he and Maharaj are trying to count them.
I think he talked about it before Einstein. Einstein came out with it also, but later.
Well, back in these days,
Back in those days, universes were equated with galaxies.
Right.
When they looked out and they saw galaxies, they would consider each one a separate universe.
Yeah.
So that might have been what they're saying here.
It's an interesting thing that, in astronomy, the Hubble Telescope came into use. I don't know, do you know the Hubble? This is where it was, LA. Yeah, so maybe people in LA know about the Hubble Telescope. Well,
you're talking about the Hubble Telescope?
Huh?
Mount Wilson?
Maybe it's called that now. It was called the Hubble Telescope.
The Hubble is later, I think.
Well, it was Hubble who was doing it, I'm sure of that. And maybe it got named that afterwards. But he made the critical discoveries at that time that what they called nebula was actually galaxies. And also, because of the redshift of these galaxies, he noticed that the farther away they were, the farther they are moving apart. And so it was actually 1927, this year, that it was Lemaitre was the guy's name, proposed that the universe...
Recording this noise. This is Gardner.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry.
Oh, the Hubble Telescope was launched in 1990. Remains in operation.
But this is something much earlier. I think, did they not call it the Hubble Telescope?
Yes.
But I mean, this one back in the 1920s.
That's all. It comes up here quickly.
Okay, well, the guy's name was Hubble.
Hubble.
And he was working with the greatest telescope in the world at the time, and I think it was here.
Mount Wilson.
Mount Wilson.
Mount Wilson. He's the one that discovered the redshift.
Right. Right. He discovered
The Hubble Telescope is named after him.
Okay. So it's not the Hubble Telescope, but it's the telescope that Hubble used. It was Hubble's telescope. Yeah. So anyway, there was a French physicist in 1927 who proposed, if you back extrapolate from the redshift of galaxies and stars, you come to the conclusion that they all originated out of a single point back in time. And that's the source of the Big Bang Theory.
1920s. Hubble discovered the galaxies.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, he was the one. And so at that time, in the world of physics, the consensus opinion, just about the universal opinion, was that the universe existed forever. The universe was, they used eternal. I use the word eternal differently. And it was because of this that the idea got proposed that the universe had an origination, right? It began, and now it's called the Big Bang Theory. Einstein didn't believe it either at first, but there's a famous bit of film where he's brought to see Hubble's telescope, and he comes out, I can't do German, but he says, I have been convinced of the necessity of a beginning. He was persuaded that the universe had a beginning. There's a lot more to say about that. So the point I'm making, it was exactly at this time that all these revolutions came. Also, it's not relevant to this book as much, but quantum theory also emerged right at that time. And I personally think it would be very fruitful. There are things in here actually, but it would be very fruitful to look at what Baba was saying, especially in infinite intelligence, relative to that. So again, I wouldn't know this, but it occurs to my mind that Baba was giving all these discourses between 25 and 29 at the very time that these tremendous revolutions in astrophysics happened.
Oh, wow.
It's very striking. It makes me think that he was doing something in the mental spheres that came down to scientists who were attuned to it. Anyway, so this is that. And he says more about...
Is that the Baba's eyes?
Huh?
Yeah.
Right.
Looks like
Our source...
so beautiful.
Our source is here, and it just had an eye.
Uh-huh.
But we decided it ought to be Baba's eye.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll jump over this, but in the second one, okay, I'll go to this tomorrow. So let's get to where it's really with the third talk that Baba really seriously starts to enter this topic. And this is a good statement of some of the themes. He's talking to the boys, okay. Can you read it in the back? Is it too small? Okay. To glean, okay, he's talking about, God, the mighty existence. Yet to glean some faint idea of this mighty existence through the intellect, he's just been saying the mind can never understand it, but to glean some faint idea, let us at least understand, as far as possible, the infinite Creator's equally infinite creation. In the endeavor to do this, let us compare what is really and truly the incomparable with, and these are the three I want to highlight, the ocean, light, and knowledge, since these serve as the three suitable similes under the circumstances. So the next bunch of lectures develop very extensively on metaphoric systems based on the ocean, on light, and on knowledge. I don't think they're really metaphoric systems, but I'll start out with that. So the first, okay, then we have this bunch of diagrams. This illustrates, the oceanic metaphor. So I tend to focus on the diagrams in these presentations because it's kind of the easiest for people who are encountering this for the first time. God is being compared to the ocean, or Darya. That's Persian, right? Yes. And it's also in all the Indian languages too. Those of you who've read God Speaks will be acquainted with the ocean in drops, right? It's the same idea, but it gets a lot more developed here. Then here's the creator point. Elsewhere, Baba calls that the Om point. And out of that come waves and bubbles. Also, it's not in this diagram, but each wave contains innumerable drops, Baba says. God Speaks has the ocean in drops, but this brings waves into the picture. And there are wave bubbles and there are drop bubbles, both of those. And a drop bubble would be like David, you're a drop bubble. Or one of those hedge plants there, or a bird, or a stone. All of those are drop bubbles. Jivatmas. Do you know the word jivatma? Yeah. It's a good word to know. It's a living atma, a living soul, a soul in bondage. A wave bubble is a world like the planet Earth. So there's going to be a lot of that. So that's a wave bubble. And I'll anticipate what's going to come up soon. bubble means the gross sphere. When you reach the gross sphere, bubbles appear. That's one of the things that this shows. I don't know if you can see it, but at the bottom, this is where Pran meets the gross sphere, and it's there that bubbles arise. See? So there's a real kind of cosmological, metaphorical content that this metaphor is loaded up with. Okay, I don't know if you follow this so far. The basic.
So prawn meets the gross world.
What's that?
You said prawn meets the gross world.
Yeah, when it meets the gross world, bubbles appear. Bubbles are associated with the gross, not the inner spheres. It's really the gross that it comes up. You see, Baba's giving a kind of a precision to this metaphoric term we haven't had before.
What figure is this? Is it 6? Just on top, I want to make reference.
Figure number.
Figure number, please.
Oh, yeah, this is figure number 6.
6, okay.
Yeah. Why are you asking? You don't have a book yet.
Well, I'm making notes.
She stole mine.
I'm stealing from your explanations.
You're going to steal my book. I'll say, where did my book go?
Trying to steal your brain too, but it doesn't it's not possible. Upload.
So this is one of the metaphoric systems. Also, Baba has right here, see, A is the Darya or the ocean, B is the creator point or the Om point, he calls it elsewhere. C is waves and bubbles, and drops are part of this story also. Drops being individual atmas. And D is foam. And Baba brings up foam several times and says, I'll explain it presently. And he never did. So this is another task for the LA group. To resolve this question finally, what foam is.
Foam is when you have soap and water. You pour air and
What is the difference between wave bubbles and the bubbles that we learn in God Speaks?
Bubbles that we learn in what?
God Speaks.
They don't learn bubbles.
God speaks.
I mean, we have
They're both up on the chart there, wave bubbles and drop bubbles.
You know, God Speaks does not address the question of waves. He doesn't bring it up.
It doesn't say anything about waves.
Yeah.
and foam.
So when I read God Speaks, I always thought a bubble is a drop bubble. But I suppose after reading this, you could go back to God Speaks and say, he meant wave bubbles too. I don't know. But Baba doesn't bring up the concept of waves. Yeah.
Could the waves mean the vacillation between duality that we go through in order to become one at some point?
Well, we're going to have more on the form of a wave and its significance. But he clearly means something like, okay, it's best understood through a wave bubble is like a world. He definitely means that. It's a larger collectivity. It's not higher planes. I mean, it comes down to the gross plane in the form of a wave bubble. This is kind of cosmology, where the cosmos came from. So this is, one metaphor. I'm going really, really quickly. When you read it, you'll see Baba develops these things quite a bit. Another metaphoric system that Baba uses, and I always have to move way ahead in this series of talks, is light. Remember, he had those 3 things: the ocean, light, and knowledge. So the first bunch of lectures, he's actually developing a rather intricate pattern here where he interconnects these in all sorts of ways in these early talks. I don't know, Sam, did you notice that when we were going through? I know we just did it once.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he's yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's sort of hard to get when you get to know it better, you see it's an intricate weave of these themes that he's doing. And these are some of the key terms in it. When Baba gets I'm coming to the astronomical series, but this kind of illustrates the idea. Here's the source diagram, by the way, that has the same content. But, okay, this is the light and light globe metaphoric system. And a light globe is not a star. It's the source of stars. Baba talks about pure light with a capital L. You know, the Arabic word is nur. Nur. Did that make it into Persian?
Yes, Persian too.
In the Indian languages, the Urdu influenced would use the word. If you listen to Qawwali, sometimes you'll hear them singing about nur, nur. Okay, light is God itself. The light globes are shadows of light. They're actually shadows. And Baba says there are innumerable light globes, countless. But clearly light globes, I can go over all the different references to it, but they're clearly not gross sphere. There must be in some higher realm. But now we're going to get into stuff that your 7th grade astronomy teacher somehow neglected to tell you about. The shadow of a light globe is a world. So this Earth is the shadow of a light globe. Right? Now remember that this world is also a wave bubble. So actually these metaphoric systems, there's correlations between them. That's part of what Baba is developing. But anyway, the shadow of a light globe is a world. And might as well go further on this. This is where it gets wild and crazy. It turns out that the shadow of the light globe, a shadow is not pure darkness, Baba says. He says it's the faintest of faint light. And as such, it can cast its reflection out. So the shadow of the light globe, which is a world like our Earth, casts its reflection into emptiness. You see, our word space you translate it that way, but it doesn't quite capture the flavor of the Indian words. Pokol is one of them. Hollowness, or akash is another. It's emptiness or receptivity. And the image is caught there. It's like in a mirror, right? The image of the shadow is caught in emptiness, and that image receives the light of the light globe and reflects it back to the world.
Repeat this again, please.
The world, which is a shadow, not pure darkness, but the faint light, casts its reflection, its image, into pokol, or emptiness. Like if you see your face in a mirror, it's like an image and that image can receive the light of the light globe. The shadow can't, right? Because if a shadow receives the light of its source, it's annihilated. The shadow isn't there anymore. But the reflection can receive it, and receiving that light, it reflects it back to the world. And in this way, this reflection becomes the sun.
Is there a movement there in the hollowness?
Isn't that strange?
Yeah.
Have you ever heard anything as weird as that before?
I gotta say something.
Sun has reflected.
Farhad Shafa has a really interesting take on this in holograms. Boy, I'll tell you, it's really,
This is really funny. I was told this way back in 1973. By Apollo.
Really?
The sun was a reflection of subtle energy. The sun really wasn't kind of like an object on its own, but a reflection of subtle energy. Now that I'm seeing this, I'm thinking, where did he hear that? So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Also, I want to make another point that in particle physics, particles are actually created by waves that move through the ether. As a wave of energy moves through the ether, it leaves little particles behind.
Yeah.
You can call those bubbles if you want. But it's just interesting.
You know, this book in particular is just inviting people who really know about physics and astrophysics to bring that to it. You know, I know a little bit, but not very much.
Yeah.
But so this is one of those things. Yeah, where the sun is the reflection of the earth. Again, your 7th grade astronomy teacher probably neglected to mention that point.
You ought to have brought it up.
Yeah. And, okay, this is only the beginning. From here, this is the tame stuff. From here it starts to get wild and crazy. We may get to that in a minute.
Lord, I do believe that in God Speaks or in some other published sources that have been around, there is some reference to this idea of the sun being, you know, a sort of like another iteration of something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, some of this very content did get published in the Maher Message for anyone who might have seen it, but hardly anybody has seen the Maher Message. They did publish this back in 1929.
There's also the Advancing Stream of Life, which I think may have some of that material.
They might, yeah. Ramakrishnan, who compiled that, would have known this stuff, yeah.
Okay, go back. I have to, anchor myself somehow so I can get something out of it. So this light globe, is it this side of beyond God, or where is it? Is it on this side of home point, or
Yeah, no, the light globes are part of the order of creation.
Creation, in the creation.
They're shadows of light.
I see.
Yeah. I'm presuming they exist in one of the inner spheres. Baba never exactly says that, but he does imply it in certain places.
Okay.
I don't know which plane it's on.
Can you please explain the last arrow? So, world, the second world, what is it?
World casts its image into Poco.
Yeah.
This is the image of the world.
Of the world, yeah.
Right.
This is, and then the last one is, I need a little bit,
illuminated image throws its light back on the world.
On the world. Where does this illuminated image come from?
Okay, well you see the world casts its image into Poco, right?
Yes.
And it gets illuminated by the light globe.
Oh. Okay.
Because the image can receive the light of the light globe.
Yes.
You can see that a shadow can't receive the light of its source, right?
That's right.
If the light of its source comes through, the shadow is gone.
Exactly. It's
But
the
the image doesn't have that limitation, so it can.
So
and it shines it back upon. So our sun is a reflection of the earth.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So the sun, where does the sun get its light from? Is it its own? I believe it's self-generating, but what does
I mean, Baba must be talking about the derivation of the gross sphere from higher spheres.
Yeah.
You know, it must be something like that. But he's in this account, the sun gets its light from the light globe.
From what?
The light globe.
That's the look.
You could call that, if you wanted to go out on a limb, the inner sun.
Yeah.
So where is the
something
light
like
globe
that.
in the cosmos? Where is it?
There are innumerable light globes, Baba says. Countless.
We don't have names for them?
Well, Baba's called them light globes. I mean, they're not observable physically.
Oh, I see. That's a subtle light.
I presume so. I mean, this doesn't make any sense if you try to make it gross sphere. Baba didn't quite say this to the kids because he hadn't, they were kids, and he hadn't said, well, there's the gross sphere and the subtle sphere and the mental. He hadn't explained things that way. He was giving a very imagistic picture of things. like that.
And the light globe is significantly smaller than the sun.
Yeah, there is a place that always said that this is the reason we did it this way. See, in the source, it's not done that way. It's like that. But in this, Baba says, shadows are bigger than their source.
Yeah.
So we consistently chose artistically to make the light globe small. That was our choice.
And this kind of invokes the sort of a visual three-dimensionality.
Yeah.
It seems to be distant.
You know, again, Farhad had this thing about holograms and the holographic universe, which really is interesting, I have to say. Makes me think something like that. I mean, this was kind of a wild and crazy idea when Baba proposed it, but it's no more wild and crazy than the world of physics nowadays. Like that.
What shadow is bigger than light globe? Why? Because its location?
Baba just said this, that the shadows are bigger than their sources. They appear bigger. They appear bigger than their...
And yet, light globe is not a shadow.
It's a shadow itself.
It's a light globe.
But it's actually, Baba said, a shadow of true light, which is God.
So light globe is not true light?
The true light is God.
But the light globe is not light.
It's not God.
The sun is not light.
The light globe is not God. It's a shadow of God.
There's several layers going on.
Yeah.
You also
How
have to
the
be
reflection
careful.
of God.
You also have to be careful when you're talking about gross light.
Yeah.
As opposed to sun.
I mean, this must be in the subtle spheres we're talking about. But the light on the subtle spheres is not God. The subtle sphere is still the illusory world, yeah.
So in Persian, actually, when you said Nur, which is that light globe, we also have...
Nur isn't the light globe. Nur is God.
It's God.
Nur
So
is
it's a Nur ala Nur. So there is another word, Nur ala Nur. So
Like it beyond the beyond.
yeah, so that's what it's called, Nur ala Nur. Right? And then this is what, so this is the shadow of that.
But Baba doesn't use the word Nur on this level. When he uses that, he uses it to refer to a light with a capital L, which is God.
Yeah.
You know, Baba's taking these words and using them in his own way.
That's right.
Yeah. So do you see?
Yeah, it's very nice.
We're getting, you see a little bit of these two metaphoric systems?
Yeah.
Now here's one reason, you know what a metaphor is? It's like, my love is a red, red rose, right? Well, that doesn't mean that I go around kissing roses. It means that the girl I love is as beautiful as a rose is, right? That's a metaphor. Well, we could say these are metaphors, but I'm not sure they really are, because apparently our physical sun really derives from it. So, I suspect with oceans and waves and stuff, he may be giving names to things that actually exist. Yeah. That's what I suspect. But in our gross world, we think it's a metaphor. That's what I suspect is true. Yeah. Because, you know, we don't, especially modern civilization, we don't know any of this stuff, you know. In fact, even, it seems to me to be pretty totally new. Okay, well I mentioned these three systems. We may come back to this if we get time. I mean, you guys, you can see already there's a lot here, right?
Yeah, but it's sweet.
And I'm just I keep touching these certain highlights as a highway into some of this stuff. Okay, well, Baba then, the third system is knowledge. Notice that light globes, shadows, reflections, that's if you see a metaphoric system, that's a visual or perceptible metaphoric system in the perceptible world. The ocean, waves, drops, bubbles, that too is a concrete perceptible in our visible universe. Well, knowledge is not, but knowledge is a pure abstraction. But he makes that the third in this series. And here, we start getting into some of the metaphysics, which we'll be coming to really soon here. Knowledge corresponds to the real, that is, God himself. he doesn't have light here, but that would also fit into this. And you see Darya, or ocean, is another name or designation for the reality of God. This top row, then, is the real sphere. But once you descend from the real into the illusory, then you start getting pairs of opposites. This is a big theme in this book. More about it. So within in knowledge, the domain of knowledge, the opposites would be knowing and ignorance. Both of them are actually within the domain of ignorance. Both of them are false. Both of them are within the created world, the illusory world. But within that illusory world, they define the two poles of things, right? So knowing is actually not real knowledge with a capital K, but it has a likeness to real knowledge. It's similar. It's the image. It's the reflection of knowledge. Whereas ignorance is the reflection of the opposite, right? So opposites are like this. One is like a fractal or a derivative or an image of the Okay, let's take these two primary terms in Meher Baba's metaphysics, the everything and the nothing, right? Are you guys familiar with that?
Yeah.
The everything means God, God and God's reality. And the nothing is absolutely nothing. It doesn't exist at all. And yet, for the everything really to be everything, it has to include nothing. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, so these are like those opposites reflected in the illusory sphere, knowing and ignorance.
So the diagram that you have there, these words clashing there in the one that is...
This one here?
Yeah, that's the relation of this subtle and gross clashing. It's not related with the knowledge, it's the knowing and the ignorance.
Yeah, you're right. So you're racing ahead of us. That's that's what we're coming to, actually. Yeah, it actually is those two. Yeah.
What was her point again?
Huh?
What was she?
We'll come to it. We'll come to it in a minute.
So why do you say that subtle is illusory? Because subtle clearly is not illusory.
Well, in Baba's account of things, only God is real. And this entire universe is an illusion. You're an illusion. That chair you're sitting on.
But subtle and Akash.
That's illusion.
That's illusion.
The bubble is illusion. Akash is illusion. Huh?
It's still in a world of duality.
Yeah, it's in the world of duality. Whereas God is the absolute unitary, non-dual reality of things. That's the only thing that's real. So everything in the order of creation is an illusion. Everything. Light globes, waves, bubbles, all of it. Yeah. So here's another thing to get to understand, that Baba at this time often used the word subtle to mean the entire inner domain of the subtle and the mental. That's the case in infinite intelligence. He says the gross sphere and the subtle sphere. Well, that's the entire created realm. And that's the case here. So he didn't talk about the mental sphere in those days. So just don't get confused about that. So when he's talking about subtle, it's like the first plane through the sixth.
So subtle is anything except gross.
Except God, yeah. Everything between the gross plane and God, yeah. In infinite intelligence, he sometimes uses the phrase Jahane Baki. Yeah, you know that? Is that, yeah. The enduring world, the inner, the invisible world. In Islam, often the inner planes are called that. The invisible to us gross conscious people. Although I realize that most of you here in the LA group are, way beyond that.
In Persian and Urdu poetry, they often use the phrase "Do Alam," the two worlds, which
right,
is the
Do
gross
Alam,
world
yeah.
and
two worlds is the gross and the subtle.
Yeah.
So they weren't differentiating between what Baba later called the mental and the subtle.
Yeah.
And so Baba was using that model for the most part at this time.
Yeah.
Right. So knowing corresponds to the subtle world, and ignorance corresponds to the gross. Okay, I'm trying to introduce these three systems, right? The ocean, light, and knowledge, really quickly. Baba spends a lot of time doing it. Well, this really gets us to one of the dominant themes of the book, which is Pran and Akash. That duality is really, really pivotal. This diagram is on that subject. I'll pull it up here. Yeah. If I can make this, I can't make it all bigger, but I can make that part bigger.
It's the same thing.
So now you won't find Pran and Akash talked about really hardly in any of Baba's later discourses. It's interesting. When the Westerners showed up, many of Baba's fundamental themes he dropped. He didn't try to explain again. Some of them he recapitulated later on. In God Speaks, you have a very developed account again. But some ideas never got recapitulated, and this is one of them. But it turns out to be a huge part of Meher Baba's cosmological account. Now, what these words mean, they're very familiar words in India. They're basic words in Hindi and Gujarati and Marathi and all of that. They would all know these words. I think Baba is using them in a somewhat deeper way than they're usually used even in conventional Indian metaphysics and cosmology. But Pran, prana, prana energy, like that. Like yoga deals a lot with prana. It's the same word. And Akash is space or emptiness. But this is, I think, the deeper sense that Baba invests in these words. He will often say energy, and he means pran. He'll use energy often as a gloss for it. But there's a bit more to it than that. If you try to imagine the original state of God as an infinite ocean, right? Like you get in God Speaks. Well, here is the really big flaw in that image. Whenever I think of an infinite ocean, it always has extension. It goes up and out and out, doesn't it for you? Like a black that goes on and on and on. Well, the critical defect in that understanding is that ocean has no space. It's spaceless, which is not something that we can imagine. It's kind of beyond the human imagination. Nonetheless, an infinite ocean is kind of the best that, can be done for gross conscious souls like me. So, but for pran could be glossed or it's construed as movement or happening. Something happened, change. Any kind of movement or change is the pran side of things, right? Now, if you're in an infinite ocean that has no time or space, where does happening happen?
In nothingness.
But nothingness has no space, has no extension. Don't you need extension to happen? I mean, we think of space as kind of like a vacuum in a kind of world of Descartes, with 3 dimensions, so you can go on and on. There's no space. So how can it happen if there's no space? It's like, to put it this way, let's suppose you're constrained to the Om point with no dimensions at all. How do you move within the Om point? You can't do it. What Akash is an opening or a potentiality or hollowness in that sense. It's the principle that something can happen here. Now, that can only exist within the illusory sphere, right? In reality, it can't happen. Well, happening can only exist within the illusory sphere too. So you see how these two are this is the primal duality. These two have to be there for any kind of creation to exist. Is this making sense?
Yes.
You guys? So movement, energy in the sense of movement or happening, for it to happen, there has to be an accommodation. It's like, you want to dance. David wants to dance. Esther wants to dance. Well, you've got to have a stage. You've got to have some space where you can do it. That's what Akash is.
To drive a car, you need streets.
Right. If you're somehow in outer space that has no dimensions at all on the own point, and you're limited to the own point, how do you drive your car? I mean, your car collapses to the own point too, right? So the principle of accommodation or opening is what Akash is. That's why the word poko, which means hollow, expresses something of that. It's not just space, it's like it wants something to fill it. This is the primary duality.
I'm sorry. So Akash appears or creates when the movement happens?
Akash makes the movement possible.
Oh, so does it happen before the movement starts, or is it a necessary bedding for that movement, like you said, needs a space?
Cassandra, I'm going to hit them with a Buddhist term. What do you think? Do you know pratitya samutpada? Anybody?
No.
Dependent arising. For the one to arise, the other has to arise.
Oh.
I think it's dependent arising.
Dependent arising. What a nice word. Dependent arising.
No entropy.
Isn't that a little similar?
I'm not sure you could even attempt to, that would kind of be on the other end of things. This is the principle that allows the world to exist at all. This duality. And I think they are necessary co-conditions. And we don't have a creation yet, right?
Right.
This is before creation.
This is the backstory.
This is the backstory. The creation arises when they clash.
Yeah.
And when they clash, Baba says, there's a flash of lightning. He uses the word we wrote here, Vij, flash of lightning. And at that moment, you get the first Jivatma, the first drop soul.
Yes.
So this is where the creation story starts. Yeah.
I think it's really helpful to think of Pran as the masculine and Akash as the feminine. And that moment of clashing is the instinct of birth.
Yeah.
And what is born is illusion.
Right.
They're both an illusion, but what is born is the multiplicity of illusion.
This would be thinking the imagination in infinite intelligence terms. Any of you?
What would be, please?
The clashing of Pran and Akash is where the imagination gets thought. Or...
What is the thinking here? Thinking is real.
Yeah, so I'm not quite correlating it. These are both unreal.
Yeah.
These are the two parts of the imagination, actually.
Yes.
You'll find this in Infinite Intelligence. He says that explicitly. Prana and Akash are both in the domain of the imagination. I don't want to get too far this way because a lot of you may not know Infinite Intelligence, but it's an important part of this whole metaphysics. But when they clash, the other way of understanding this for God Speaks readers is this is the fourth state of God. God is the embodied soul. That's when it happens, right here. So you see, this is a creation narrative. And it's something, I have a whole talk that I've given, and we'll be doing it again at Marana, on this creation narrative and the one that you find in God Speaks. They're very different from each other. I think they can be interrelated. I definitely do. But the God Speaks creation narrative is the whim surged, God said, who am I?
Yeah.
And then he does say, with the arising of the whim came contrariety. I don't know if any of you know contrariety. Well, I think this is the contrariety. And notice this also, Pran and Akash clash. He consistently says this. And this is something that's a bit hard to imagine, because how does emptiness clash with happening? Emptiness doesn't have any substance. So this is the third problem for the LA group to solve. Yeah, no, these are things that are, going to challenge people's creative imaginations in the future. So this is a very fundamental part of this book. Pran and Akash continues throughout the entire book, these themes. Have you guys followed this much?
Yes.
This part?
Thank you.
So going back to where we were on this, it turns out that this is energy, that's Pran actually, and you see here Akash, right? Energy, Pran, in the evolution of the universe, winds up giving rise to the whole subtle universe, which means the entire inner world, the Jahani Baki, right? The invisible world. The Doa Alam, this is the subtle. And Akash, or emptiness, winds up giving rise to the entire gross world. You follow that? In a way, it is very counterintuitive, because many of us gross conscious people think that the gross world is not empty at all. It seems to be full of solid objects. But in fact, Baba says, in its essence, it's emptiness. Actually, I think contemporary physics might go with Baba on this one. So you see, subtle and gross are derivative from Pran and Akash. And this extends across these other things. On the subtle level, where Pran is, there's knowing. And on the gross level, where Akash is, there's ignorance. Like that. Movement and emptiness. So these are some of the ideas in the whole first series of lectures. There's a lot more there, but Baba is giving you a cosmological picture with these as some of the key terms. It's a very intricate web he weaves there. Okay, so how are you guys doing with all of this? Is this... Yeah.
It's beyond me.
Yeah.
It's very fascinating.
Yeah, it really is fascinating. It's the sentences, as I say, the prose is not difficult, but the ideas are very, very deep. So it's worth kind of rooting on them when you read it, I would say.
And
this
visualize maybe?
Huh?
And visualize maybe?
Visualize and whatever it takes. This is a book you have to read many, many times. Yeah.
I just thought I'd bring up one little thing, which is that in my understanding, in kind of metaphysical science of both India and the West, they often will speak of 5 elements rather than 4 elements. The 5th element being
Akash.
ether, which is equated with Akash. And so it's
Yeah.
like the 4 elements are contained in this 5th element of
Yeah.
Akash. Yeah.
What is the 5th element?
It is space. In Western languages, they call it ether.
Ether. Yeah.
And in
Yeah.
India, it's called Akash.
Akash is ether, but it's also where knowledge exists. So it's
Yeah.
like a library.
Like the Akashic records, they say. You know how much, there's these terms, Pran and Akash. I haven't seen them paired this way very much. I saw a little bit in something of Vivekananda's, but I haven't really elsewhere. So I don't know if this Pran and Akash as the primary source of things isn't a idea that it has a history before Baba. If anybody learns more about that, I'd like to know.
Oh, it goes way back.
Well, the
6,000 years.
words do individually,
Yes.
but as a pair, as the primary pair before the rest of creation exists, has that been there? I haven't found that.
I think so, but we will have to find it.
I mean, it's worth this. You see, this calls out for research. But things like you just brought out Akash with the other four. It seems to me that Baba is using Akash in a more radical way.
Yeah.
And I think he's using Pran in a more radical way. It's not just the subtle energy that you could levitate things with. It's movement itself. It's the principle of movement, the principle of change. That principle exists before the creation does. And it's out of that the creation itself occurs. You know, I'm just shooting off at the mouth because I've worked with this for a long time and thought about it for a long time. But now this is out there for people to make of what they will. People may come up with a very different understanding than what I have. I'm just doing the best I can.
And more, these lectures, at least to this part of it that I get a little bit out of it, is this came before God speaks.
Way before.
Way before God speaks.
30 years before.
This is pretty advanced.
Yeah, no, this was.
Baba's time.
Yeah, no, this was early. This was. Baba hadn't gone to the West. You know, when he went to the West, he totally dumbed things down. It's not quite fair to the West to say this.
Yeah, but that's true. Well,
But metaphysically, he did, actually.
Yeah.
Or,
Well, Baba talked about it.
to put it another way, actually his discourses to the West that he gave were actually very, very beautiful and rich and subtle. The West was really good at other things, you know. There was science was very developed in the West, and I don't want to discourage the West, it made it its own big contribution. But Baba did drop all these things and didn't try to explain them. It would have been too much, I think, at that time.
The other thing is,
Huh?
This was
the other thing, this was given 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And today, we're finding, this is what happens if you read this book. If you read this book, you'll start discovering things that are being revealed today through science
Right.
that seem to attach to this and explain it. It's like manifestation.
Yeah.
Yeah. It seems that Baba wanted us to read God Speaks first and then this.
Yeah. Well,
This timing.
I think that God Speaks is actually easier to approach.
Yeah.
But I think that the reason all this stuff stayed hidden for 100 years is because right now we're much better able to understand it than they would have been 50 years ago.
Yes.
The world has really changed, you know, in so many ways. So now it comes out. Isn't that a strange plan? Yeah.
I have a question about that chart.
Yeah.
So are Pran and Akash considered opposites?
Yeah.
So in the discourse of Baba talks about opposites, they're really, it's like light and dark, but dark is just the smallest thing of light. Is that kind of considered here too with Pran and Akash in a way? Are they actual opposites?
Seems to me that they're more actual opposites. I hadn't quite thought about that. Let's keep that question active. That's a question worth considering. Sometimes, like he'll say, you know, most finite form as a term for Kash, which almost begins to seem like the smallest degree of. I'm not totally sure. Yeah.
But thinking about it, you have to have the body to advance, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of contained. The subtle contains the ghost of all. Is it you have to have it.
Yeah.
Were you going to show the circle and where the opposites come?
Yeah, I was just thinking of coming to that.
Yeah, it's coming.
Yeah, we broached the topic of the opposites, and there's a lot here. The idea of opposites as such turns out to be an important part of Baba's, I hate the word philosophy, I'm using the word now, darshana, which is the Indian word for a system of philosophy. And it's more than just a system of philosophy, it's also an ethical system and a spiritual path and everything else. I think it's a much better word. But opposites are an important part of Meher Baba's darshana. And in his later books like Discourses and God Speaks, they're kind of presupposed, but Baba does not focus on them as such. But in this early stuff he did. So coming a little bit to opposites, like here, this table, we won't linger on it, but this is opposites. Okay, principal God terms. Knowledge is opposite to ignorance. Paramatma is opposite to the universe. Isn't that interesting? Paramatma is the term for God. God beyond is opposite to the universe. The infinite is opposite to the most finite. Okay, that makes sense, huh? Now again, does that mean it's a matter of degree or pure opposition? Nirakar, that's a really important word in this time, in infinite intelligence. Akar means form, and ni means without, so formless. Formless, the formless is opposite to sakar, which is with form. Formlessness is opposite to with form. And darya is opposite, now isn't this curious, to form or hollow space. Remember the bubble. A bubble is fundamentally empty. And that is the nature of the gross. It's fundamentally empty. I somehow don't quite, in this presentation and others, I realize I haven't really dilated enough on emptiness. But let me just say that it's really a big theme here. It's a big theme in Buddhism, of course, especially Mahayana. Now, Nagarjuna, any of you ever read Nagarjuna?
Yes.
Yeah. Shunyata and all of that. Okay, so now here we're starting to get the divine theme, right? An account of the divine theme, which, as I say, seems to be the organizational pattern for this whole series of lectures. I'm just going to be really quick on this. But so down at the bottom you have unconsciousness or ignorance or the universe. It's like the universe in its latency, the original beyond state, I suppose you could say. And now here you have the beginning of evolution, and here you have the culmination in human form, right? Those of you who have read Baba's God Speaks and stuff will be acquainted. Evolution is from the most finite form to human form. But the interesting thing here is these three rows, and they actually correspond to what we just saw. Atma is the reality. Atma, the drop soul, is actually identical to God. Atma never changes at all. It was God from first to last. But this is the subtle, let's say the subtle body, meaning subtle plus mental, and this is the gross. And the gross is the form, and the subtle is the knowing. Do you remember knowing? We had that earlier. Knowing and ignorance. And
Illusory.
the false consciousness of drop souls in illusion, of jivatmas. You could say that's, in fact, the word that Baba uses in infinite intelligence for this is Chaitanya. He uses Chaitanya to mean that. So this is, now here is part of a relation, but this is the pran aspect of us, and this is the akash aspect of us. Us means all drop souls, all jivatmas, human beings and everything, all other things down to stone form. So the knowing aspect corresponds to the pran, or the subtle, and the form corresponds to the gross. See, so he's you see how he's using this same framework he set up with this primary duality of prana and akash used here to illustrate evolution. You're getting this fundamental duality. Yeah.
Can you equate knowing with consciousness?
It has a relationship. Baba doesn't talk in this series of talks about consciousness as such, but I would think of it as conditioned consciousness, a name for consciousness in a certain state. Like for an animal of the instinct, for example. It's that kind of qualified consciousness. So it's not pure consciousness, but it's...
That could be a form of knowing, conscious of...
Yeah, a modality of it. We're going to have more on this later on, where he talks about inspiration, revelation, intuition. Those would be modalities of consciousness that are part of Chaitanya, that are part of this story. Yeah.
And word, that most finite form, the electron.
Yeah.
Can we talk about when the electron...
Yeah. No, Baba here says that the evolution of consciousness starts with the electron, he says. This would be interesting. I mean, I notice, in contemporary physics, when you get beyond primary particles, which would be electrons, neutrons, protons, I suppose, things get really kooky. You get into this quantum realm of things. Anyway, infinite intelligence really needs to be brought into relation with this. So this is the divine theme. I mentioned earlier that this series of talks seems to follow the divine theme broadly, in that, as we've seen, it kind of starts with a creation narrative, right? Prananakash, that's a creation narrative. He's actually, by this time, starting to go into the evolution of consciousness there. And then later he'll get to involution. But I've noticed that the part of the divine theme that he really almost completely skips over is reincarnation. And I think the reason is this. He was talking to these boys, and he wanted to transport them into the inner realms. The bondage of reincarnation was not the theme he wanted to, have them dwell on. When they got older, they'll find out about it.
A secondary thought is that most of them were Zoroastrians and Muslims, and those religions don't happen to include reincarnation in their narrative.
Yeah, Baba wasn't worrying about that very much. He brought it up when he wanted to anyway. Yeah, that is true though. Yeah, it's not a big theme here.
And Lord, can you just review this Atma, and these written words when it gets to that point, the E point? That
what about
reverse direction for...
This is for the involutionary path.
Involutionary.
Yeah, this is the journey through the planes. The real path, I already expanded, yeah I am. Okay. The real path, the Ulat path. We don't have any Indian speakers here, do we? Ulat. There's a pair, Sulat and Ulat. Ulat is reverse, and Sulat is, what's the opposite of reverse? Converse? It's sort of like the ordinary state of things is Sulat. We need to take a break, don't we?
Yeah, we need a break, new pot of coffee, and, whatever cold drinks are left out there, and you can take your sentence or something, but everybody, I think, we give you a break.
Take a little break. When we taught infinite intelligence in Mirana, they had like Sulat soup. Ulat condiments. I don't know if you got any of that. Okay, so we'll resume in a few minutes, 10 minutes or so.
That's in the subtle sphere right out here.
Oh, Okay.
Beyond the gross.
Okay, how do I get to the subtles here?
Or can you bring this down a little bit?
Not everyone can
please?
get there.